Good morning to most, good afternoon to others, and of course, good evening to the viewing audience across the pond. I'm your host, Jason Miles, here for another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. We are doing a special episode, and sometimes we don't want to pre-record it. We just want to do it live. In this case, we're covering the Polish elections real time. While this is an early morning off day episode, we will be back again Tuesday evening at our regularly scheduled 6 p.m. Pacific time slot. Looking forward to seeing you guys there. Also, if you dig this listener supported programming we have here on TIR, think about becoming a patron for as little as $3 a month or $30 for the year. You can make sure TIR can continue at such a breakneck pace. Today, Poland stands at a pivotal juncture in its political history. The presidential runoff election pits two starkly contrasting visions of the nation's future. On one side, it's Karol Nawrocki. I'm going to be saying these wrong. Kuba will be correcting me. A right-wing historian with a controversial past, backed by the Nationalist Law and Justice Party and endorsed by Donald Trump. His campaign resonates with something we recently discussed on this show in a previous episode as a bit of a techno-populist appeal. Now, Rocky emphasized traditional values and skepticism towards the European Union. On the other side is Rafał Trzaskowski, the pro-European Union mayor of Warsaw, representing the centrist Civic Coalition. Trzaskowski advocates for liberal reforms, including judicial independence and stronger ties with the EU. The election is more than a choice between two candidates. It's a referendum on Poland's direction towards nationalist populism or continued integration with European democratic norms. The outcome will not only shape Poland's domestic policies, but also its role on the international stage, particularly concerning EU relations and support for Ukraine. To discuss this with me, I have my homie, my dog. Sometimes he's my neighbor, the Ben Burgess.
I'm more or less always your neighbor. I'm not always at home.
Oh, high five.
High five. Yeah. Now this election. This live stream, I think, should probably mostly be the two of us talking, because I think if there's one thing that Ben Burgess and Jason Miles know, it's Eastern European electoral politics.
You know, people don't understand.
Got a deep expertise about this.
when we go off on our journeys to Tijuana, that's what we're talking about all the time. What is really going on behind the veil of Eastern European politics? Someone that knows Eastern European politics quite well. He grew up in Poland as a young Polish lad. That's where he got his stoic demeanor. Please welcome Deep State Kuba.
Witam wszystkich serdecznych Polaków i również naszych przyjaciół z wszystkich kątach świata.
What he said.
He said, "I'm happy to be
here." My dog.
I'm following Poland's elections more than I thought I would. I don't know how this conversation started for us to want to do a show about this. Did I just hit you up? Or was it after the show I did with Alex O'Culey?
Alex O'Culey wanted to have somebody who could talk Polish elections. And I realized that the way that my travel schedule was lining up, that I would be here for the presidential runoff in Poland. Right now I'm in Krakow. That actually is one of the polling centers across the street behind me. Until about 20 minutes ago, people were going in and out, casting their ballots. It'll be a good sign if it stays closed and the lights stay on, and it will be a bad sign if it bursts into flame at any point or there's a loud explosion.
Is it that bad over there?
No, not at all. Like, not in terms of tension or hostility. Everybody feels that it's a high stakes election. People are uneasy, because the polling has been so close. And right now, there's exit polls that indicate a very slim margin for
Yeah.
the Platforma candidate, Rafał Trzaskowski, who is the pro-European candidate and kind of the best choice out of the two. He has just over 50%, 50.3, which has been enough for, and these are exit polls, not official results. That's enough for his campaign to have declared victory, which, I was around for 2000 in the United States. That's the right move to do if you have any advantage whatsoever, but not enough for this to be a completely done ball game. We'll have votes counted through the evening, and that's a healthy margin. But again, that's just exit polling. Those are not final or official results. Nawrocki has not yet to concede, and we'll see if if that exit polling, if the poll of polls is holds up through the night.
Would you call Nawrocki? Would you call him a techno-populist in the sense that Alex and I were discussing in that episode about this new form of governance? Do you look at him that same way? Because he does have a bit of a populist appeal, kind of coming from the outside of the political sphere.
I think that I wouldn't necessarily single him out in that respect, because that type of techno-populism, combination of populist rhetoric, kind of civic inclusion, together with libertarian or modernized forms of organization and outreach. That's actually something that has roots all the way back to the 90s in Poland, and there have been much more aggressively techno-populist candidates in the past, and including ones which are, for lack of a better word, like much cooler. There was a bald former punk rocker named Kuzik that was doing pretty well about 10, 15 years ago on a similar platform with a similar take. And the ceiling for these kinds of guys, even if they come from a very outsider position without any party backing, tends to actually be much higher than what we would consider to be leftists of any stripe. So it's an unusual political environment, and I hope we could get into that with the results from the first round election. Poland is one of those countries that has the very sensible policy of imposing a moratorium on the day of election for campaigning, electioneering, and discussion in the media. So today, especially given that it's a Sunday, so most stores are closed, it's been a lot of families out. The lineups for ice cream around here have been crazy, but the election has also claimed a fatality. The 75-year-old man in Poland came to a polling place, and shortly after casting his ballot, collapsed with a heart attack, died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. And I know what you're thinking. It wasn't me.
Is that a true story?
Yes, it might have been at this polling place. I don't know. They didn't report the exact location, and I didn't hear ambulance sirens, but I know that there was that incident. And because that's technically not election news, that's one of the very few things that news outlets could report before the polls closed. So, of course, everybody, that was a very big story here.
I'm going to bring up this.
Imagine how much pain like all of the talking heads would have in the U.S. if they weren't allowed to talk about the election on election day.
I mean, they might be having the heart attacks at that point.
Yeah. Sam Cedar has a stroke.
Exactly.
Extra fucking stream.
Ryan Grimm. It's just an entire
another stroke right there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Totally have a stroke. Here are I think this was the first round.
Yes.
Results.
So Polish elections occur in 2 rounds, and similar to elections in many other countries, where the first round is open to a broad field of candidates, and if any get over 50%, it's over. That person becomes the president. Otherwise, the top two finishers move on to a runoff election, which is what we had today, while the others are eliminated. And in the first election, you get a real view of the different positions, the diversity within the Polish electorate. And it had 11 candidates, of whom the top 7 are represented here. The ones that are significantly below 4% and no substantial party backing. They can't even fit on the infographic. But this is a very good sample of the most relevant candidates, and they do give you a flavor of who's in play and their relative strength. At the very bottom, with just over 4% of the elector of the first round vote, is Magdalena Bejat, and she is in government right now, one of the leaders of the Sejm and a member of the New Left Party. She has what are very kind of AOC style leftist politics. It's much further along, much more developed than someone like Kamala Harris. For instance, there's a class dimension as much as all of the identity politics, although the identity politics feature very prominently. In a debate, Karol Nawrocki, or actually, I think Nawrocki may have boycotted that debate, but one of the conservative candidates brought over a pride flag and plunked it in front of Rafał Trzaskowski as a means of trying to brand him as, the pervert candidate. And he didn't repudiate it, but he also just put it behind his podium so he wouldn't have to speak with it visible. And Bejat came over when it was her turn to talk, and she kind of plucked it from behind there and put it in front of herself and says, "I am not ashamed to stand up for LGBTQ rights."
Ooh.
And you can see how popular that position is among the general electorate here. Right?
Is it still that bad over there, or it varies where you are?
So the reality is that the country is very polarized. There are many places in Poland where pride is treated in exactly the same way as the most progressive parts of Western Europe, let alone the United States. And you have candidates like Bejat who are not persecuted for their positions, who can publicly and unambiguously support a maximalist LGBTQ plus platform. She's not the only one, incidentally, but generally speaking, it's not something that you win on. There's a ceiling for how many votes that gets you, because the vast majority of Polish people, even those who support full civil rights and equality for sexual minorities, just don't care that much. They do not see it as a big enough issue to be a single issue voter. There are people on the right who might treat it that way from the opposite position, but large chunk of the Rafał Trzaskowski liberal, capitalist, neoliberal position is pro-gay, but not that into it. But what is much more significant and much more severe is the other side of the equation. There is a substantial subcurrent of very aggressive and dangerous homophobia in Poland, which has a shockingly high ceiling. That's the bad part. The good part is that the majority of the population is pro or neutral, and there's no move to institutionalize that kind of homophobia until one of these guys wins or enters coalition with the National Conservative segment.
So is it mostly a position that's like is it mostly bound up with like pious Catholicism? I mean, or what's the politics of that?
We'll get to that. There's some of the middle candidates on this board, on the scorecard, have put it so elegantly that I'm waiting to quote them to get the answer to that question.
All right. Fair enough.
Doing slightly better than Beat. Incidentally, the reason that she's the new left party, Nova Levica, is because her group splintered from the overall leftist coalition, which of course was called Together, and now I guess they're apart, over the question of whether or not to back the liberals against the national conservatives. Her faction are the ones that entered government and are part of the governing coalition right now, and the lump of Together sits alone as an opposition party, a trivially tiny sliver of the opposition, and I think the only part of the opposition that can be described as left of the government. And their leader is the loser next up from the bottom, Adrian Zandberg, and he is, if he were willing to just throw away these leftist absurdities, he'd probably be a contender for president himself, because
really
he's one of the most personally liked political figures in Poland. He's considered to be extremely honest. There's no real scandals, principled, funny, and intelligent, and freakishly tall, like intimidating Viking-sized. He's 6'7", and literally Scandinavian. He's a Swedish. His roots are Swedish, and Sandberg. The guy just towers over everyone else, and that kind of alpha Chad energy. He can make supporting gays look like the straightest, most alpha thing to do. That's how much of a Chad he is. But Poland don't fuck with the left. That's it's like, sorry, Pinko, go back to Stockholm, you scandal loser. He topped out just under 5% of the vote. If he were a political party, he wouldn't even make it into the same.
Damn.
And yeah, but he's basically Polish Hassan Piker, right?
Okay.
Yeah. And so the two leftist candidates, because that's all of them, can't get into double digits between them, right? When they top out at maybe like 9% if you round generously. And that's it. All the rest are different flavors of right wing, starting with actually the most left of the right, which is Szymon Hołownia, who looks like a male nun and has the politics of early era Rod Dreher. He's like anti-gay, but not in a hateful way. Anti-immigrant, but not in a hateful way. Anti-Muslim, but not in a hateful way. Pro-Catholicizing the entire country, but, gently and with consent. Maybe turn on some light jazz, run the bath first, right? Like, do some aromatherapy and couples massage before you go all the way. But that's his plan. That's his position. And he doesn't want to defund environmental protection. He doesn't want to cut social benefits or anything like that. He just wants a nice, friendly Catholic theocracy. And is that too much to ask? 2 or 3 election cycles ago, he actually was a contender. He came in 3rd place, and people were talking about his movement as being transformative, as a third way, a kind of triangulation between the national conservatives and their emphasis on tradition and piety, and the more generous side of Platforma, the liberals, and the left more broadly. But right now, his movement has really been eclipsed by angrier versions of the right. He joined the coalition to get rid of peace in the last election, and his party is represented in government. They have a few ministerships, and he's, I believe, the vice speaker of the House of the same. But as you can see, he couldn't cross the 5% threshold either, despite how well his party has done in the past and how persuasive that position should nominally be to many of the sort of middle of the road, nice guy Catholics that Poland is allegedly full of. But I think what happened to him, he fell victim to the fact that early era Rod Dreher is not a stable form. It evolves, it mutates, it changes. And the next guy over is one of the potential evolutions, Grzegorz Braun, or as I like to think of him, Nazi number one.
He's pretty horrible. That video you showed.
Yeah, horrible. He's really bad. He's he is. My sister's partner is Jewish, and because of Grzegorz Braun, one year, all of us independently in the family reached out to him by text message to apologize for our country. There was an incident, Poland, as just one of these sort of bare minimum civic gestures of inclusion during Hanukkah last year. It was either last year or 2 years ago. Lit a menorah and placed it inside inside Polish parliament. They've had done this before. They're continuing to do it now. It's one of those things which, for the vast majority of people, is not a big deal. It's such a basic civil gesture that it's almost trivial. And he came in with a fire extinguisher to blow out the candles.
Jesus Christ.
It's recorded. Al Jazeera broadcast
you sent the video of it, and
yes.
He did it and felt nothing.
Oh, I mean, I suppose there was some joy there, like pride. He looks like Gavin McGuinness.
Yes.
And has very similar politics, but somehow a more brutish, more dangerous form. And incidentally, he got, I believe, over 6% in the first round, just based on the power and strength of his anti-Semitism. And this is despite not really having much beyond nationalist chauvinism and emotive hatred to campaign on. And that 6%, bizarrely, he got almost twice that among the Polish diaspora, who nominally are supposed to be the people who have been civilized and tamed by living abroad in the more tolerant West. But he represents the most extreme form of this very dangerous undercurrent, the violent and unapologetic homophobia, bigotry, and nationalism. Now, as ugly as he is, the next one over, Sławomir Mencen, or Nazi number 2, is probably the more dangerous one. He's, I guess, J.D. Vance to Brown's Gavin McGuinness. Mencen is kind of brilliant when it comes to electoral politics, positioning, messaging, and that's the reason why he's the only one of the minor candidates that's in solid double-digit territory, 15, close to 15%. And if he had done a little bit better, if he had managed to, perhaps if there wasn't another Nazi splitting the vote, then he might have been able to overtake Nawrocki as the NatCon choice and enter the runoff. Mencen he's younger than I am, and he's going to be around for long. He is that nerd boy energy. I think of him as a combination of Karl Rove and Steve Miller. That means that he's actually into the boring technical work of organization building, party construction, all of the stuff that typically the most dangerous electoral figures and the most extreme political movements struggle with. So I think that he's only beginning, and there's a real risk that as peace begins to wane, back-to-back election losses are going to hurt their brand, and people on the right will look for alternatives and new leadership. Menson, unfortunately, is positioned to capitalize on that and increase his profile. And he has a very clear message. There are 5 things that he stands against. Would either of you like to hazard a guess as to what those 5 may be?
Jews.
Yes.
Jews,
Yeah. Nailed
Jews,
it. Nailed it.
Jews.
1. That was the very first one. Yeah. Jews.
Oh, sorry. 4 Jews and an immigrants.
4 Jews.
Well, actually, I'll take it back. 3 Jews,
Mm-hmm.
and immigrants,
Mm-hmm.
Ukrainian Jewish immigrants.
You mean Zelensky himself personally?
Yeah, exactly. I saw Dreamer76 in the chat says, "I never thought I'd say good thing there are 3 Nazis."
Split the vote. Yeah.
Oh, thank God. I was worried until the third one showed up.
Yeah, like, ooh, now they're really splitting that hate vote up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is it better in Poland now? Like, if you and I were walking down the street, they wouldn't call you a monkey befriender or anything?
So it's
about that.
No, it's it's better and worse in the sense that 20 years ago, my family members would say stupid and ignorant things about Jewish people, Black people, foreigners in general. Now, because these are live political issues in Poland, they've had to think about it. And they've been exposed to arguments on both sides. And I'm happy to say that most of my extended clan on both sides have broken non-Nazi, right? Like, they have polarized in the right direction. And at this point, everyone hates, like, with the possible exception of the 9% that vote for the giant Swede and the collaborationist woman. Apart from those people, everyone hates the language of political correctness or wokeness. They can't keep track of the changing terminology, and they find it taxing and annoying. But the principle behind it, right? Racial, ethnic, gender inclusion, LGBTQ rights, and anti-Semitism. That's among the population that won't vote Nazi. Those are pretty secure.
Well, it's like
but then there's all the people who vote Nazi, right?
Sure. I mean, well, it's like I always think of it as like the sort of, Joe Biden synthesis from 2020. Somebody asked him at a campaign event, like some right-wing troll, right? Like, who's there in person, was like, asked him.
Did Ben cut off? Joe Biden was like, never again, Ben Burgess. Jesus.
Now might be a good time for that extra special picture that you brought up.
I can't get it up. That didn't sound right at all. At all. Things I never want to say again. Now I can't get it up. Is 4 of them. Wait, maybe this is it. Let's see. Got it.
No.
Cool.
Well done.
Got it up. I got it up. Jason got it up.
So the gentleman with the bow tie, like Benjamin Button Tucker Carlson here. That would be Nazi Zero. That's Janusz Korwin-Mikke, and he is the founder of Konfederacja, which is the far-right party in Poland. And it was the incubator for both Grzegorz Braun and Sławomir Mencen, as well as an entire generation of like besuited brown shirts. He tapped into this very long, obscuranist, intolerant, traditionalist mentality in Poland, and tried to make it fun, make it interesting. He was willing to be outrageous. For instance, he's in the record of the EU Parliament in Strasbourg explaining that women should earn less than men because their brains are smaller. It's just biology.
You know? Whoa.
Yeah, he says he's your grandfather's racist, right? Like, it's your grandfather's racism. It's actually, it's not your grandfather's racism. It's literally my grandfather's racism. Not the communist grandfather, the other one. They actually kind of also look alike. But he was also kind of fun, right? He would reach out to young people, go to events, and he loved going to cosplay conventions. And this is one actually of a series of pictures of him going to, anime conventions or whatever it was, and getting handsy with the young ladies, picking them up like that.
So,
in this case, the charming young lady that he's swooped up is actually a charming young lad. And yep, exactly.
And he didn't know.
He had no idea.
Did he grab him by the boy pussy?
I think that his old world gallantry means that he just puts them back down and tells them to go to church. But the other people involved informed everybody of the exact circumstances, and I think that may have been the last cosplay convention that Korwin-Mikke ever went to.
Can you imagine how mad he was to get all those erections?
and now you can't trust them, right?
You can't trust you. Yeah, I'm sure.
And if you can't trust your erection, what in this life can you trust?
Also,
I've got to admit, there's some like weird little analytic philosophy part of my brain that's just like autistically trying to figure out. It's like, wait a second. Why should people with smaller brains be paid less? just try to track down the like internal coherence of the position.
Well, imagine him trying to figure that out when there's a dude in this cosplay outfit,
exactly, who has a full-sized brain in that skull of his,
working properly because he's tucking his cock.
Also, I love
that. By the way, the Biden thing I was saying earlier was somebody asked, a right-wing troll asked him how many genders there were, and he said, I don't know, at least 3. Which I actually always thought was a weirdly perfect answer because it communicated, like, I don't agree with you, weird bigots, but I also don't care very much about this stuff.
Which is correct. Nailed it. Nailed it the first time, Joe. No notes. One thing that I particularly like about this picture is that when you look at the faces of the onlookers, you get the full spectrum of Polish opinion, right? The only woman in the picture is relieved that it wasn't her, and like very much appreciates the femboy taking one for the team.
Sure.
In a wonderful paradox, I love the fact that the guy in the military fatigues, if you zoom in on his face, he's absolutely delighted by this. He knows exactly what's going on, and he thinks it's funny as all hell. While the security guy knows exactly what's going on and is outraged at the disrespect being shown to his Führer daddy.
Welcome to Poland.
Witamy. And that gets us through all of the extreme and minor and leftoid candidates that collectively actually represent a significant majority of the first round vote. Well, maybe not a majority, but large enough to force the second round. And then we're looking at the two main currents of Polish politics. The good news and bad news is that Polish politics are Polish political culture is 50% fascist, right? 50% other stuff, but 50% fascist. And that the constituency for different kinds of national conservative, intolerant right-wing politics is strong and durable. The future of Poland as a country and as a society will be determined by the balance of forces between these two groups. There aren't that many. It's not as though there's some kind of vital center of moderation that is steering the course. No, you have two sides clearly defined and antagonistic towards one another, and only one of them will get the country that they want. Karol Nawrocki, while he's nominally, I won't go so far as to say he's Nazi 3, but he's definitely belongs to that national conservative camp. The Law and Justice Party, because of their lengthy period of controversial government and just disillusionment with where it brought Poland, is so toxic that he ran as an independent in this presidential campaign, even though the party lined up behind him and he had their full support and backing. They didn't run any other candidates. It was just him. But he understood that Law and Justice was such a liability, he refused to accept that brand. They also selected him because he was a bit of an outsider to electoral politics, being a historian at the Anti-Communist Institute of National Memory, which I don't have any issue with their mission or the existence of such an institution, but it basically is becoming the heritage foundation of Poland, an incubator for right-wing political ideology and the scouting ground for the future political figures for of the national conservative movement. And on the other side, you have Rafał Trzaskowski, mayor of Warsaw, and there's not a socialist bone in his body. He is the closest thing to a male Kamala Harris that you could find in Poland, or maybe a straight Pete Buttigieg. I don't know, but he represents that current of pro-EU, pro-business, pro-capitalism, but also pro-individual rights and freedoms, liberal market economics that used to be dominant in the United States. He's kind of like an Arnold Schwarzenegger Republican, and he's the good guy because that's the formation which has the real juice to push up against national conservatives.
With an era of increasing polarization in Poland, what obstacles does a candidate like Trzaskowski face in mobilizing a lot of support?
I think that I see Tony Red asking if Nawrocki was the Trumpist candidate, and
Trump endorsed him.
Let me switch this.
I'll put it this.
Oh, cool. Yes, exactly. Bizarrely, this year, the CPAC conventions that are being held aren't in Washington, but in Warsaw and in Budapest. And at CPAC Warsaw, Kirsten Noem came out with an explicit from the party that bemoans all of the election interference that the EU does and is outraged by EU commissars looking into people's social media posts and policing speech and violating the sovereignty of member states, Kristi Noem came out and anointed Nawrocki as the official MAGA candidate for Poland. And Poland is one of the few countries, and the only major European country, sorry, Hungary, that could potentially be a pro-Trump element in the EU.
Really?
So, yes, even Italy under Meloni is too Atlanticist, too pro-NATO, and too pro-Europe to fully cooperate with a MAGA, JD Vance style shit all over the Europeans and do tariffs to everybody type of program. However, Poland, partly because of its own domestic culture war, which dovetails nicely into the war on woke, partly because of a certain strongman admiration that many on the Polish right have for Trump, partly because of the hope that despite Trump's unilateral secession from NATO and turning his back on Europe, that they can, with enough pro-Trump propitiation, maybe a few Trump towers in Warsaw, maybe another 200 billion in arms sales and arms purchases from the United States, they can somehow keep the United States bound to a Polish security pledge against Russia. So all of that has created a certain constituency, that there is such a thing as a MAGA poll.
Like the Trump thing on NATO was never exactly, we should leave NATO. It was more like, all you lazy freeloading foreigners should like pay more for your military because because the fact that the US pays, whatever, like the stupid Trump math, right? Like, but it's like that the premise was that like the other NATO member states aren't paying enough and and they need to be like scolded into paying up.
So I want to update the chat on the status of the election. Polls closed an hour ago, and early exit polls show the neoliberal, the good guy, winning by a little under 1%. He's claimed victory already. He says he's going to be the new president, and they're celebrating in Warsaw. We'll see if those figures get confirmed because the official count is still ongoing. But the figures in the first round, the exit polls were very accurate. So we shouldn't jump to any conclusions, but things are looking much better for the non-national conservative side than the conservatives. This is after a collapse in polling. The Trzaskowski enjoyed a healthy lead up until the first round. I think a lot of mobilization took place for the first round by Nazi 1 and Nazi 2, right? The Konfederacja, cosplay fondlers league, was effective in getting out the vote and bringing people to the polls, bringing polls to the polls for the first round. And that translated into a giant bump for Nawrocki this time compared to where polling was 3-4 months ago. But it wasn't enough to get him over the finish line, according to exit polls right now. I don't want to jinx it one way or the other, but right now it looks as though it's a strong position for the Platforma candidate. The polls that would dance, right? Platforma has all of the gays, so the best moves are being busted. Yes, the goose stepping though, that's quite subdued. for the moment. But yeah, it's a very challenging and tricky situation. The Trump position on NATO has definitely been that there need to be more arms sales, that they should pay up, but it has always taken the form of the traditional formulation for that criticism from the United States has been that you need to invest more in our collective defense. Trump's version is you need to kick up to me, right? Like, where's my tribute? And what for me really cemented the sense that this does represent an exit from NATO, or at least a significant weakening of the security guarantee, was some of the leaked strategic plans coming out of Hegseth's Pentagon that indicate that in case of a two-front war or Russian attack into the European Union, but pressure from China in the Pacific, the position of the United States was just going to be to abandon Europe. That there was not going to be the cavalry coming to the rescue in case Putin made it as far as Poznan. Putin to Paris, right? Like, and the Fort Bragg to Beijing.
Do these endorsements help from figures like Trump for these domestic elections in Poland?
I don't think so. I think that there was an element of risk that Nawrocki took on, because if he rejected the endorsement, but then ended up winning, he'd be in a very awkward position to deal with Trump. Trump, probably would have taken that a little personally. But at the same time, the surest way to get one of the low attachment, low information voters in Poland to activate their nationalist sensibility and really want to show it to those arrogant foreigners is to have airhead bimbo commissar come in and tell you that you're supposed to, that the emperor demands that you vote for his guy. I think that that's how that endorsement was read by a non-trivial number of polls that might have been persuaded to the national conservative side. And ultimately, in an election this close, that may have broken it for in favor of the liberal side.
How might the election of either candidate affect Poland's relationship with the European Union, particularly regarding judicial reforms and the adherence to any kind of democratic principles?
So platform, the real anti-democratic template that exists right now, and that the European Union is anxious about, the type of thing that got them to void the election in Romania, for instance, is the Orban playbook, where you consolidate authority in a centralized political system, and you use that to seed peak economic, business, institutions. You use it to attack the independence of universities, civil society. You use it to subordinate the courts to your political movement. And that was what the Law and Justice Party was self-consciously and quite explicitly trying to reproduce in Poland. They had gotten as far as breaking the independence of public media and making conditions extremely challenging for the operation of private media. And they were zeroing in on the courts to eliminate the possibility of judicial obstacles to their policies. Right now, we're seeing that in the US, those judicial obstacles are real, right? It remains to be seen if they can hold, or if Trump is able to sweep past them, ignore them, brush them aside, remove them. But that is currently an institutional obstacle to going ultra mega. The Law and Justice Party, following the Orban playbook, you get rid of the courts first, and then you go full MAGA. And that was where they were at before all of the opposition, right? We're talking about the leftists, the male nuns, the Greens, the Peasants Party, everybody who wasn't in the Law and Justice plus Nazi NatCons got together in the last election in order to secure a parliamentary majority that could push out Law and Justice. And that's what they've managed to achieve. This was the next stage of that. The presidency was still in the hands of Law and Justice, which meant that the combined government hasn't been able to undo everything that Law and Justice implemented in their 8 years in power, 8 or so years in power. Now, with the presidency and the parliamentary majority in their hands, the hope is that I realize that this is going to be weak tea for many of our viewers, but the hope is to restore bourgeois democracy to the way that it's supposed to work. Mm-hmm. Independent judiciary, a robust civil society, protection of individual liberties, together with the conditions for EU-friendly neoliberal economics. And that is absolutely what the EU wants. This is the outcome that they were hoping for in Brussels, 100%. Now, in terms of foreign policy, this is also good news for the Ukrainians and other immigrants in Poland. Law and Justice has that chauvinist streak, and Polish Russophobia is deep enough and universal enough so that Ukrainians were welcomed by hundreds of thousands, by the millions in the early stages of the war. But that welcome has worn out faster among the nationalist side, that really kind of expect, especially the men, to go back and die for the glory of Ukraine, right? Like you're supposed to. The liberals are cheaper in the sense that they'll cut funding, right? They don't like spending on immigrants, but they're much less likely to send you back or demand that you fight. And in terms of the war itself, Poland is possibly the European country that takes the Russian aggression against Ukraine the most seriously, right? Poland is the next in line in case Ukraine collapses and becomes a full-on Russian protectorate, Belarus style. And already we've seen massive increases in defense spending and the announcement of a universal reserve in case of Russian invasion. So there is no peace party in Poland in the sense of a group that would support making significant concessions in order to end the war in Ukraine, right? Preference is, of course, Ukrainian victory. If not, then allowing the Ukrainians to get the maximalist possible outcome in any negotiations rather than undercutting them for the sake of a premature peace. So on that particular front, no matter what the outcome of this election, Poland was always going to push for a greater militarization of the EU and a continued role in supporting Ukraine against Russia.
Can you briefly explain the blue and yellow demarcation? It looks as if it's
red
more
state, blue state.
Yeah. Is it as simple as rural, urban? Is it more complex?
The line, basically, with a few exceptions, right? Mm-hmm. That deep yellow island, one of them is Warsaw, and the other one is the industrial city of Łódź. I believe the little dot of yellow is the city of Brest on the border. You can see smaller dots in the south representing many of the urban centers in the south and east. Now, maybe that's Lublin. And in any case, so there is definitely a strong rural-urban divide in Poland, but that doesn't account for all of this yellow territory in the West. Part of this goes all the way back to the Russian, Austrian, and German partitions of Poland. It's actually very eerily similar, that line between dark blue and the beginning of yellow, to the Russian partition, the Russian zone of the former Polish, Lithuanian Commonwealth. Warsaw ended up being within the Russian, in Russian lands, and that is kind of the outlier, while the rest of that area was more heavily under sort of Russian influence from a political economic perspective. It's also where you have the least benefit from EU admission. I think that that's the main vector that keeps this divide alive. The yellow areas are closer to Germany, closer to Lithuania, closer to other EU states. They have been better situated to take advantage of not just foreign investment inflows, but regional development grants from the EU. That's also where the biggest markets are, and shared markets, right? If you want to set up a network of retail centers or get yourself into pan-European supply chains, you're going to situate yourself along the German border, or access to the Baltic coast, or along the border with the Czech Republic. That southern area especially is where much of Polish heavy industry is situated: coal mines, steel mills. And it's very unsexy talking about those kinds of industries, when you've got Google and ChatGPT, but they're the backbone of European manufacturing, right? All of the inputs that go into German-built BMWs or Mercedes, they begin life as raw materials and intermediate industrial goods coming out of Silesia and the factories of southwestern Poland. The Eastern zone, it's deeply paradoxical, because one way that the East really does benefit from Europe, and really why they're able to stay afloat, why they don't just all move to London in order to deliver pizzas, is the agricultural subsidy scheme that Brussels makes available to the EU member states. It's similar to the United States, where whatever you grow, if you've got some agricultural land and you fill out the right paperwork, you get certain subsidies and you get guaranteed returns. So there are thousands of villages across Poland that survive off of basically Brussels checks for potatoes, wheat, agricultural staples. But there, the social connection with the EU and a sense of, I don't know how much of it is cross-national and how much of it is like domestic, blue state, red state, right? Like rednecks versus liberals resentment. There is, without a doubt, a significant economic divide between those two zones. Poland has done very well for itself economically over the last 20 years. It is on the cusp of catching up to Japan in terms of GDP per capita. But that overall average masks some substantial inequality. But Polish inequality doesn't take the form of American inequality, where you have the top 1% or 0.1% that basically have everything. Instead, the yellow zones have everybody in the yellow zones, right? A substantial portion of the population, maybe the top, maybe 50% of the population, they have about twice as much as the other 50%. And it's a big enough gap, so you know where you fall and you feel it. but it isn't so concentrated in an oligarchy. The top Polish billionaire has something like 1/500th the personal wealth of Elon Musk. I think a lot of the reasons why Poland has the politics that it does is because Polish capitalism is not in crisis for whatever sets of reasons, and there's a lot to go into. You don't have deindustrialization. You don't have the collapse of working class incomes. You don't have extractionary and predatory financialization. And instead, what you have is a system where, in that classic Clintonian expression, you work hard and you play by the rules. You get your annual trip to Italy or Spain, maybe another one around Christmas time, someplace else. You get to renovate the apartment that you got for free at the end of communism, and do it up nicely, like in one of those gay magazines from Austria. The cost of living is actually constrained by the fact that a lot of what you consume is produced locally, right? Either through the Polish side of supply chains, or in the case of food and agricultural products, right? There's a huge abundance of high quality and nutritious food available in Poland. And the peak Polish capitalists haven't figured out yet how to do the financialization plus state capture thing to amass all the money without actually contributing anything. So they feel as though you still need to do something to make money. And I'm not suggesting that this is a durable condition. It might be a model with another.
So that gets into, like, I think maybe the main thing I wanted to ask about, because you kind of said earlier that the sort of relatively good guy, right, in this context, right, in the sort of the same the gooder, right, it's the same spirit that it like says something about how bad Hitler was, that Britain, that this like globe spanning colonial empire, Stalin's Russia, and the US, when it was a racial apartheid state, were relatively speaking the good guys. But yeah, the gooder guy, right? And he said, all right, so this is the sort of basic, like, European oriented kind of, neoliberal, mildly progressive, liberal, like market liberalism, that of course, people here can be very unexcited about, but I mean, it's certainly taken over the insanity being offered an alternative. And so I was wondering, it's like, okay, so if you take kind of the basic shape of that, right? I mean, that sounds like we could be talking about, Harris versus Trump. I don't know, it's the, Le Pen, versus Macron, whatever, right? Like any number of cases like this. And usually the leftist sort of critique of that is not, is not just, well, like normatively, right? This is, far, far, far short of what we want, but also like pragmatically, that like in the long run, this has diminishing returns, right? That you can kind of like rally people around the mediocre neoliberal, like a certain number of times to stave off disaster, but then like they end up getting so little out of that eventually the techno populists, or whatever you want to call them, end up winning anyway. But of course, that's an analysis that's grounded in the fact that in most of the countries we're talking about, capitalism is in crisis in ways that you just kind of said that in Poland it really isn't, right? So like I guess maybe just a simple way of asking the question would be like, given
It looks like somebody doesn't want the question to be asked. I'll pick up a little from there. I think that one substantial difference between the Polish situation and a country like the United States is the parliamentary system means that this polarization doesn't end up with either one party having a majority or the other, but there's a role for these smaller and ideologically diverse factions. The
Really
leftoids with
not
their
like a
the leftoids with their 9% showing in the first round election are nonetheless kingmakers. There's two of them because one of them was willing to go along and enter the coalition to give the liberals the seats they needed to form a government. That does give them a certain amount of influence. There's entire ministries that are run by the leftist party, just like the Ministry for Agriculture is run by the Polish. My bad old-fashioned mind wants to translate it the Polish People's Party, right? It's not the Polish Peasants' Party anymore. You're not supposed to say that. And these kind of under the hood, insider baseball detail, small bore differences actually do have substantial consequences further down the road. An agricultural policy that's run by an entire political party grounded in the support of villages and the support of people who are not big capitalist agricultural producers. They're not agribusiness, but they are smallholder farmers that deliver votes and not cash to back their party, their guy. The fact that the Ministry of Agriculture is in those hands and not in the hands of Cargill or Archer Daniels Midland or a similar massive agribusiness conglomerate means that the benefits that were won with great difficulty, things like the distribution of land for major landholders in the early 20th century, the resistance of collectivization during the early communist period, and the preservation of Polish smallhold agriculture, even when there was a very dangerous transition period on EU ascension when the subsidies hadn't fully kicked in. Everyone expected that to wipe out Polish agriculture, but thanks to their representation in Warsaw and in Brussels, Polish smallhold agricultural producers were able to survive that transitions and now are thriving. So I think that parliamentary system in these balanced and polarized conditions where the Polish People's Party has formed coalitions with both the National Conservatives, with whom they're more culturally attuned to, and the liberal pro-EU Platforma side. That means that the sectional interests of these groups that are far from being elite do get protected in meaningful ways. So
sorry about that, Kuba. Looks like Ben Burge is having some internet connection issues.
Yes.
I was trying to find real-time results, but everything I'm seeing says that this election is so close, no one wants to call it, even
Yes.
with the polls coming out.
That's absolutely correct. The even in the first round, it took several days before the exit polls were officially confirmed by Polish government agencies, by the Polish Electoral Commission. For several days, nobody knew who actually came in first. Everyone understood that no one was close to the 50% threshold, but it took several days before the preliminary results in the exit polls were confirmed officially. So that's where we are right now. The exit polls are a good marker, and based on the strength of the exit polls, and part of this is tactical, right? Like if the exit polls give you an edge, you claim it. You call yourself president, you say that you've won, right? You do not want to be Al Gore in 2000. So that's what Platforma is doing. The exit polls are a good indicator, but not a final one. And we may not have final results tonight. There will be an update. Polish journalistic sources are saying there will be an update in another 35 minutes. But right now, yeah, all we have are the preliminary exit polls and the fact that they're already cheering in Warsaw.
Oh, you can hear the cheering.
I'm in Krakow, right? Like
okay.
This ain't Luxembourg, my friend.
How do your family feel about everything?
I was told by my parents that like you can vote for whichever freak you want in the first round, but in the second round it's Trzaskowski or you're out of the family.
Well, I also looked real briefly, and apparently more people showed up for the second round voting. So that leads me to ask you this question: in what ways has the media coverage, both domestic and international, shaped the narratives around the candidates? Has it had some influence, you think, in what we're seeing in the exit polls on the outcome?
I was following the response to the first round election results, and in the liberal leading outlets that I tend to prefer, I'm not gonna spring for a subscription to the Polish Der Stürmer, right?
So there's something to be said for it, right? I mean, the old joke about the two old Jewish guys sitting on the park bench. One of them is reading like the forward, right? The Yiddish paper, and one of them is reading a Nazi paper, and the one who's reading the forward turns. How can you read that? What's wrong with you? Says, well, look, if I read your paper, it just tells me depressing shit all the time. Right? If I read this paper, it tells me we control the banks, the media. It's awesome.
Heard that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of true. Like in the right-wing imagination, gays are having such a good time, right?
It's always a party with them. It's always
exactly
a party.
Yeah, it's just like one parade. It's like parade, orgy, and then you get to be gay married by a celebrity. But to the question of the international media coverage and the treatment of the different round election results, the liberal forces were very, very unsettled by the strong showing of Nazi 1 and Nazi 2. That was sobering, and you could just they were a little like the Jewish guy reading the forward, right? It was not good news, and they felt that it bode very poorly for the second election results. They really, it's funny because none of them would ever vote for the leftoids, right? Like that's just a stupid thing that dumb college students and internet perverts might do. But they wanted the leftoids to be in double digits, right? You want those guys to have the bronze medal, not the love child of Karl Rove and Steve Miller. And seeing how poorly they did, especially compared to the most virulent segments of the far right, I think that may have mobilized turnout among a little in the way that anybody but Le Pen voters come out for the second round of French presidential elections. Seeing that there's a real possibility that the National Conservatives may lock in the presidency for another term, a lot of voters came out and it's like, okay, we have to do our thing for Trzaskowski. especially since there is some optimism that if you get a Platforma guy in the Belvedere, which is the Polish White House, then you might be able to actually integrate more with Europe. You might be able to secure the independence of the judiciary. You might be able to roll back some of the institutionalized sexism and discrimination that PiS had made part of their platform. So, especially too, right? Like we talked a little about how there is a constituency for MAGA Poland, and there is a constituency that resents being told who to vote for by any foreign leader, whether they're from Brussels or Washington. There's also a profound disgust towards Donald Trump and the direction that the United States has taken among the more liberal segment of Polish society. That may have also played a role in mobilizing people in the second round vote.
What about the youth engagement? How are younger voters shaping this turnout? You have this leftoid, as you call them, running coalition almost, and they can barely poll at they're polling under 10%. Is the youth more geared towards the right at this point? Is there something that this right populism is saying that is resonating with the youth? How are they affected by this influx of Ukrainian immigration? What I read was like 1.5 million Ukrainian immigrants since the war started in Poland.
Mm-hmm. So there is a segment of the Polish population for whom the Ukrainian welcome is run out. You know, especially as mobilization and lack of manpower is becoming a constant refrain. Mobilization problems and lack of manpower is a constant refrain from Kiev. With the men who have come into Poland, it's enough of a traditionalist country, so you know you should be fighting for your country. Why are you here? Why are you hiding? Right? It's different if you're a woman. It's different if you're old. But so there's an element of that. But it's very much a double-edged sword, right? Like because some people get fed up with the Ukrainian immigrants, and some people date them. Right? The language is similar. Right?
I mean, to be fair, I'm sure some of the people who date them eventually get fed up with them.
Point taken. Point taken. The and among young people, I don't think it's quite the same story as in the United States, where young men especially have been radicalized towards the right, and you have a remarkable shift rightwards among Zoomers. I think in Poland, it's exactly the same division all the way down the age hierarchy, all the way from the grandparents to the youngs. The leftoids do badly in Poland for some of the same reasons that the leftoids do badly everywhere, which is there's a lot more. There are a lot of people who would vote for them, but one, you know, no one is far left enough for me. Two, I don't believe electoralism is for cucks, and I don't believe in voting. Three, I was going to vote, but then I got high and right, like I was too afraid to leave my apartment. All of that kind of, those effects really do disproportionately hit the youth vote on the left. The youth vote on the right like wakes up early and jogs. I don't get it, but I see them do it. The more salient part might be that, unlike the people before the Zoomers, you don't have a disproportionate youth vote skewing left. And I think it partly has to do with Corbyn and his cosplay outreach, but the far right has been good at maintaining a youth wing, at cultivating younger leaders, at being in spaces for young people. So there's a pipeline that reaches out to young people and brings them in to far right politics. And that's been durable. It's not dominant, but it maintains the 50-50 split. And because capitalism isn't in crisis here, there is a sense, like going out today, that this is a healthy society. You don't see a tremendous amount of homelessness. You don't see street crime or violent crime in ways that would keep you from certain neighborhoods or certain areas. In fact, you don't see much crime at all. You don't see much of a drug problem. Instead, you see, young people holding hands, going out to the park, lots of kids, families. And I think that the dominant tone is, we have, for the first time in a very long time, we have a Poland that works. Things aren't terrible. And they're usually terrible. They're usually really, really bad. So this is special. And each party makes a pitch that the other guy is going to fuck it up. Right? The conservatives say that, like, the gays and the Europeans are going to let in all the Muslims, and they're going to be doing their drug sodomy out on the street, and that's going to fuck it up. And meanwhile, the liberals say, no, you guys are going to, the Nazis are going to scare away all of the creatives. They're going to frighten foreigners. They're going to turn off the Europeans, and that's going to ruin it. And depending on other factors, right, these narratives are more or less persuasive, but the level of the polarization in society is, like, the number of people who can be persuaded by these narratives gets less and less and less each election cycle as the two sides harden. Typically, what decides the case one way or another is, if a party has been in power for more than 7 years, they've fucked up enough so that voters are kind of disgusted with them and want to try something new.
Kuba, can you read this super chat on the screen?
Here's some. Niech żyje Polska. Oh, it's like may Poland live, right? May Poland survive. That's,
you want to read that in Polish out loud for the audio listeners?
Niech żyje Polska.
No, the whole thing.
Oh, the whole thing. Here's some scratch to keep the kingdom of red and white from clapping my cheeks. Niech żyje Polska.
Thank you very much, Dizzle. Ben, do you have anything you'd like to say? We've been talking for 90 minutes now. Kuba's got to go back and
No, I mean,
I got to win this with some last minute voter fraud.
Good. Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I'm hesitant to bring up neoliberalism, because every time I do, my internet stops working.
Jesus.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's, what I'd kind of been starting to ask earlier is, like, let's assume that the preliminary, I mean, I know it's like an insanely narrow percentage, but let's assume the preliminary results pretty much hold. Let's assume that, like, in the second round, right? The disasters like averted, for now. Like, given the relatively stable shape of Polish capitalism right this second, I mean, obviously there's no great neoliberal consensus given given the numbers on the screen, but I mean, like, does it seem like that's a holding action that could last longer in a Polish context than than it could in a lot of other places?
So it depends on who's right about what went wrong
Mm.
in the capitalist core. If this is a kind of inevitable cycle where at a certain level of development your labor force gets too expensive, you have so much money that you shift from manufacturing and from industrial capitalism to financial capitalism, the sectoral balance of industries shifts, and with that you have exploding inequality, a shift from the richest half have twice as much as the poorest have to the richest 0.1% have everything, then it's just a matter of time, right? Like Poland will, unless Poland fails in a different way, its success will eventually bring it to the same end as experienced by the UK, by the US. There's potentially another story, which is that neoliberalism and the package of reforms and adjustments from post-war Keynesian golden age industrial capitalism that happened as a particular moment in world time under particular conditions, and it is not an inevitable part of the cycle. Poland rising when it does may dodge it because it comes up after the crunch, right? After the extinction event. Like it's the little rodentine mammal ancestors scurrying out after the asteroid hits that gets to take over the planet rather than being one of those big, beautiful brontosauri that are now just producing petroleum underground. So I don't want to take a position on that question because I think it's much too big and there's a lot of arguments there. I do think that there are some advantages that Poland enjoys right now, which it might not squander. For instance, it has a workforce that is very technically skilled and educated. It's got like Asian levels of STEM performance, right? That's crazy. These are white people. They're not supposed to be that good at math. But it has European levels of creative output. Now, together with an openness towards new technology, this might be a country that jumps to making effective use of AI, for instance, in a way that kind of can collectively hold the growth trajectory together, and through some form of redistribution, maybe through EU agricultural subsidies, maybe through something else, you avoid the bad ending, right? And it's not socialism that gets you to a future society that doesn't suck, but it's some kind of modified, less virulent, capitalism with a bunch of asterisks. It's possible. I don't know. I would say that there are some indicators that aren't flashing red. For instance, the banks in Poland have not become hegemonic when it comes to economic policy. And there are still barriers to foreign capital swooping in and just reconfiguring the economic DNA. those are developments which have sunk other economies in Eastern Europe, especially in the smaller states, the Baltic states. Poland was actually one of the few Western countries that weathered the 2008 financial crisis fairly well. And that largely had to do with the fact that it never liberalized its international financial relationships in the same way that Hungary or the Czech Republic or the Baltic states did. Those guys got flattened. And that wasn't because of some Polish perspicacity or foresight. It's because the coalitions in the same were too fractious to ever get anything done, including the stuff that they all agreed in principle was a good idea, like financial reform. And then in 2009, it's like, oh man, I'm glad we never got around to that. It could also be that things like the Universal Military Reserve actually serves as a way to avoid some of the anomie, some of the social decay, and de-skilling that we're seeing in Western countries, especially in the United States, where young people are falling behind educationally and failing to develop certain key social skills and ability to work in organizations, right? Like, there is a sense that society is more than a collection of the individuals, and there is responsibility for the leadership to keep pipelines between home and work manageable for people who aren't Barack Obama, right? The Polish dream remains a chicken in every pot rather than anyone can be a billionaire. I don't know, but I don't know, right? There are a million ways that things go terribly wrong, right? I mean, there's Russia, there's America. This remains like, this is not a big country, right? It's big-ish by European standards, but it's like what, 1/3 of Turkey, right?
Yeah.
Barely, just like, even if it's just the dark meat from Turkey, it's still more than Poland.
So I don't know if this is just I'm not going to if is Kuba happy? I mean, he actually
I think the fact that he's just not home and he's been traveling around. Like, there's a picture of Kuba with Gene and Gene's kids. That's like the sweetest picture. I'm like, oh,
because that was the most
Aww.
optimistic response I've ever heard in my many hours of interviewing Kuba about various subjects. So that's interesting.
The failure is not inevitable, only death.
Yeah.
There's a couple more super chats I want to read, and then we can take off so Kuba can go celebrate potentially. Let's go. Lesser of two evils, says Prayer Fire Kowalski. In my humble opinion, the good Poles got out of Poland right after 1848 and made it to the Midwest to create Poland 2. Chicago is our Warsaw. I need a pierogi.
What would you put in a pierogi?
That is from Prairie Fire. Let's see. Oh, and Dizzle has one more. He says, when will Polish science solve the question of the hose? We can't let Hungary address this question.
Are we talking about, like, I mean, the wonderful thing about hose is they're useful both in the bedroom and in the agricultural potato patch.
Sure.
And since we've been talking about capitalism, I do want to capitalize.
There's one other super chat, which was, if the subsidies from, I think they UK/Germany/EU cut off Poland from subsidies, will the kingdom of red and white go BRICS? Dizzle McFizzle. Well, Panie McFizzle. When it comes to the subsidies that Poland are receiving, it is not. It's based on EU subsidies are based on a formula. They're not just sort of assigned to a particular country. You get something called the regional stabilization funds if you're poorer than the EU average. All right. It's a sector, it's a country level redistribution. Canada has them too, but on a provincial level. And then the second set are agricultural subsidies, which you get for, per farmer. So those inputs into Poland are substantial, but they wouldn't get cut off for political reasons without some crisis within the Europe that broke those formulas and broke that institutionalized redistribution. And that means that the EU gets broken. And if the EU gets broken, yeah, we're all fucked, right? And I'm not just talking about Poland, right? It is, I know many left Brexiteers in the UK, and I like some of them. But sweet Jesus, you're deluded and insane. The EU is as flawed as it is, as broken as some of it may be. It does have a tendency to push towards neoliberal solutions, but it is a tremendously positive development for all of Europe. And if it breaks down, right, then on a continental scale, you have catastrophe. And of course, that takes Poland with it.
To point out that there's and yeah, I mean, it's also Brexit here, especially because like they got like largely they got most of the good parts of the EU, without the bad parts, right? Because they weren't in the Eurozone. But it's also so they couldn't have been greased, right? Like if it had ever come to that, But I'd also point out that there's like a weird contradiction in the fact that like some people seem to be like left Brexiteers and also like sort of gray zone-ish, like the most important thing that matters is America bad, and and having and having counterweights to the U.S. and the world, because it's like I don't know. I mean, it's the no EU. That sounds like if you want that sounds like more American hegemony.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. A Europe of broken a Europe that looks like Central America is going to be America's plaything much more so than unified EU that is willing to play ball when it's absolutely necessary or pragmatically beneficial.
If you enjoy the pessimistic tones of Deep State Cuba, you should support this show with your own Anglo-pessimist tote bag.
Anglo-pessimism and Polono-optimism.
You can also get a TIR Central Committee tee with the entire TIR Central Committee on there. There's Cuba, there's me, there's Pascal, there's Jean. Look at that. On a mouse pad. You can have that. Look how cool and Eastern European Cuba looks in that picture. Right? You can get your Anglo-pessimism shirt and make all your liberal friends think you're a racist. Do it all. Do it all. For the longest time, did I tell you this, Ben? That the website was down.
Oh yeah, no, I remember.
We can. So we can take credit cards again. So we're all good.
Hell yeah.
So, thank you guys. Let Cuba party. Ben, I'm sure there's some fancy LA thing you have to do now with your new haircut.
Yeah, they only let me into the fancy thing because I got the new haircut.
Exactly. They're like, we're not letting you fucking ruffian in with this wild hair. Ken cases, do you take Diners Club?
No, but it does take the bridge card.
I think. All right, Ben's phone's ringing. All right, thank you guys so much, and we are. Where was that?